All right, Growing Unicorns, episode 6. We have Adam Goyette and we have Holly here. Adam, I would love for you to intro to the audience and just tell us a little bit about your career path.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. So I'm Adam. I currently work at a company called Help Scout. They do help desk software for SMBs, mid-markets. I've been here for the last 2 years leading the marketing team. Prior to that, I worked at a company called G2, which I think most people probably are aware of, where I led the growth team there. And so we scaled the demand gen growth team from about 5 people up to about 20 in my time there. And yeah, previously that worked at a couple different startups, all kind of in the growth world, demand gen, market automation for a while. And so yeah, that's kind of been a practitioner for a long time. So that's kind of my background and how I ended up where I am today.
Awesome.
I'm super curious, right? Like people say marketing leaders come from like 2 big buckets generally, like people who came from the brand / product marketing world and people who come from the growth world. What have you seen your job different from like a growth leader versus a marketing leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things is you have to consider a lot more outside of like growth, right? Whereas I think like it almost forces your hand to think more strategically, a bigger picture in terms of like the brand, how you're positioning the product. Whereas if your sole focus is growth, like you're almost at like, I don't say like you're not thinking strategically, but you're thinking more like a salesperson a little bit, where it's like we have a number this quarter. What are we going to do to get there? We're almost worried about next quarter. And so I think that evolution and change has been a little bit different. And so, and I think also not viewing everything through growth has been also a shift. So like Help Scout's a company that, places a lot of value on its brand and its content. And, we make a lot of big brand bets that I think will pay off in the long term, but it's sometimes difficult as someone with a growth background to say like, what's it doing right now, right? And like, where's the immediate return to get on that? And not translating that to like, well, instead of like investing that $500,000 here, we could just put that in, this paid campaign and we could get this out, right? So I think that's been one of the shifts, at least in terms of how you start to think about marketing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And who are some of the key hires, like knowing that you're going to lean this way? Like who are some of the key hires that you make immediately when you like join a team?
Yeah. So I think still like growth drives the engine, right? Because ultimately, like you could build the most amazing brand in the world. And if we're missing our revenue targets, brand isn't going to help shield me from losing my job, right? So to me, it's still about growth people first. And depending on the different stage of the startup. So like when I joined Help Scout, there was a marketing team of 5. We're up to about 22 right now. So we've grown the team a lot. I think one of the big areas was really focusing on the growth team and building out a team that, is focused on these sorts of things. So about 70% of our revenue comes from product led, right? Where it's someone signing up for a free trial and converting and stuff like that. And we're reliant on like 1 or 2 channels, organic and direct, and our content. And because most of the company and marketing had been built on content. So expanding that to say like, hey, we need to diversify the mix here because otherwise you're just at the mercy of a Google algorithm update, which could crush our numbers. And so I think that was one of the big areas of focus for me when I first came in. It was like, let's get the growth team kind of going. And then we continue to scale out content and then obviously add in like product marketing and ops and all those sorts of things.
Totally.
How do you actually think about educating or advocating for something that's less measurable, like the content or the brand side of things?
Yeah. So I think the overall thing with marketing is like, it's like that, I don't know who's got the shirt where it's like marketing attribution is made up, right? But it is kind of made up in terms of like everyone tries to pin it to one channel or a second channel. The reality is how people find out about things varies so greatly. And it's, average 8 touch points or whatever that number is now where, they listen to a podcast and then maybe they see a blog post and then they finally convert off of a paid ad, 2 months later. And, if you're a Mattermaid, you're going to say like, oh, we got this ad from paid. And it's like, you did technically, but it came from all these other things. And so I'm a big fan of just looking at basically like, are we hitting some of these revenue targets, or like whatever your target is, if it's pipeline or, whatever you're responsible for, and like looking at that as a whole, and then looking at your campaign spend kind of as a whole and say like, what's that ratio? What does that look like? And because I think then it's like, this might be a softer metric where I can't measure the direct outcome of it, right? But I have a feeling and just know it kind of is impacting that. And so it's hard to justify that outside of just having like a CEO who's reasonable and, and having those conversations and be like, well, the big thing I always do is just translate it back to their own buying experiences. Or the last thing I bought is not because, I went online and filled out an ad search, whatever term, and immediately converted on a Google ad. Like I usually would talk to other marketers. Like I think Holly, when you were at Slack, you and I met in person and chatted on the phone a couple of times. And I would always ask you like, what tech stack are you using? What are you using for this? What are you using for that? And then I would go research it and talk to two other marketers and ask about it. And I would listen to the company's podcast, and then I would like sign up for a demo. And so just, I think when you can translate that into a CEO's buying experience or whoever you're trying to justify it to, I think that's the easiest way. It's just like, well, look at the way you buy yourself, and it's not that obvious of a journey.
Yeah. I think it really does come down to like the buy-in of the CEO, and for them to, whether they have a good understanding of how marketing works or just understanding like consumer buying behavior and like letting you do what will work. Because I think I've seen companies where they get stuck on like every dollar in has to have a dollar out outcome, and like when you get there, it just becomes stagnant, right? Because you're not doing the things that are going to actually make your CAC go down because you have like a well-known brand and things like that.
Yeah. Well, also like, it's so crowded right now, right? Like there's so many companies out there doing whatever it might be. So like in help desk, there's like 300 companies listed on G2 under the category of help desk software, like 300, right? They're all going after the same personas, same people. And so it's like a little bit, if you're a startup and you're running the exact same playbook as everyone else, you're going to get very basic results, right? And so I think that's also the other way to justify it, is like, we're just doing the same thing all 300 other companies are, where we have the same playbook and the same creative. We don't take chances. We're not going to really be able to be the market leader, right? Like if you look at people and companies that are known, and I feel like, CEOs like to point out like, why can't we be more like X brand or, or this brand or that? And it's like, well, here's some of the stuff they're doing that is like, it looks genius now, but when they probably first rolled out the idea, it was probably like, what? Why would we do that? Right? Like, where's the ROI? And so I think part of it's just having a CEO who can give you that leeway to make those bets.
One of the key roles of a marketing leader is to prioritize, and especially at relatively earlier or growth stage companies, and you have limited resource and limited time, and also like budget. When you think about the different channels or different strategies of everything the marketing can do, how do you think about allocating resources or prioritizing what to focus on?
Yeah, I think the first thing is alignment in terms of like, what is the goal or end outcome, right? So like if in 6 months or a year from now, X was to be true, am I going to be, celebrated? Is this a big win for the company? And so once you know that North Star outcome, it helps you, I think, identify the things you should prioritize, right? And so I think a lot of times, I think startups at early stages kind of suffer from this like syndrome of like, we should be doing everything, right? Or you have like marketing teams getting yo-yoed around because the CEO might be like, hey, why aren't we doing this? Or this company's doing this, they're doing webinars, they have a podcast, why aren't we doing this, why aren't we doing that? So a lot of times, I was just talking to someone the other day who's going to be reporting to CEO the first time, and my advice to him was put everything onto a slide of what you could possibly do with the headline of, this is not a marketing strategy, right? Because the reality is you can be a team of 3 people. You can probably only do 3 of these things. So let's align, say like, if the number one thing that's going to be successful for us is for me generating pipeline, or for me to build awareness, whatever it is, here are the 3 things I think that would help us impact that the most. And then I think it's very clear what your priorities become, right? And as you grow the team, that expands and expands and it becomes like team specific, but the truth still kind of remains, but people need to own an end outcome And then they kind of like decide for the, as they're prioritizing what they should be doing, right? If the way I measure the person who manages their social media accounts is, number of impressions, they're probably going to run the account very differently than if I suddenly said tomorrow, then the number way I'm judging you and your performance at work is by looking at how many trials you generate through social. Those would be two very different behaviors, right? Not say like one's worse than the other or whatever, but like I think aligning them to the end outcomes that you want, that you've aligned with, the other executives on the team, help you set the priority of what you should be focusing in on.
And just to dive a little deeper, how do you think about, shall we do social media, or should we invest more in like a content program, or should we have like 3 copywriters versus 20 copywriters, versus should we invest in like paid media? So from like bigger bucket allocation or like team building or initiative planning perspective, how do you actually get to it?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things is creating like MVP versions of things, right? So I think too often people over-engineer. Like here's like ABM's a great example of this. I can't, like, so many marketers are like, we're going to do ABM, so we need to sign up with Sendoso, we need metadata, we need all these tools in place to start doing ABM. And it's like, you actually don't need any tools. You need to pick 100 accounts, and then let's like pick 5 tactics or 5 things you want to start doing and start doing it before you start investing in things, right? And so then once you're showing traction, then it's very easy to say like, hey, we targeted these 100 accounts. We were able to book meetings with the CMOs of 20 of them. 10 of them are opportunities, and we've closed 5 of them already, and here's the spend versus here's the outcome. We want to scale this program now across all of our different verticals or whatever it might be, right? And then you can go back to your marketing leader, if you're in charge of running the ABM program, and say like, here's what I want to do, here's the investment I want to make, and here's the return, because then you have a much clearer outcome of what that would be. So I think that's how you get like bigger picture kind of stuff done, is like, what's the MVP version to test out the theory? Because the reality is, like, if you're a marketer, you're guessing, right? Like you don't know. Like I've seen, like everyone says this is like ad creative. You like put out ad creative, it's like the image that works best. You're like, wow, like that's the one people are clicking on. Like why, right? Like it's just this weird thing. And so you just don't know until you start actually putting things in market. So I think one of the big things is like, how quickly can you test, and the speed at which you can go is really critical, because it helps you identify where you have potential like winners quicker, right? And the more winners that you can then scale up is one of the key ways, I think, for startups to kind of view that. So early stage startups, I think it's all about how quickly can you test and learn what channels might work or not work for you.
Yeah. And I think that's like a little bit of the magic of the type of marketer that you end up being, right? It's like you have all of these different inputs and variables, and then how do you choose to piece those together? And I absolutely like cannot stand it when people claim that there's a certain playbook for a certain thing, right? Like there truly is not. And if there was, like, we all wouldn't really have jobs. And so I think really the magic is in identifying, okay, there are all these different pieces, like how are they going to fit for our puzzle? And then, like being a persuasive enough marketing leader to say like, whether it might not be able to be quantitative, like, here's the ROI on this specific thing. So like take like a podcast, for example, right? Okay, I can't tell you like how many dollars specifically came from this one podcast episode, but I can tell you that in the last, 3 weeks of doing this, I've gained 100 registrants. And of those 100, like 50% or more of these are within our ICP, right? Like these are people that are potential buyers of ours, listening to our podcast of us being thought leaders about this specific thing. And so I think half of being like a marketing leader is being persuasive, believing in what pieces you're putting together enough to be able to qualitatively or quantitatively, however, prove there is traction, and not being convinced that there is some, secret playbook that you're just not unlocking yet, right? It's like testing, learning, trying different pieces in different ways. But yeah.
Well, also, I think too, is once you do that, and you scale up a couple of things, you then get the leeway to make those bigger bets, right? And so you're kind of proving out like, oh, okay, yeah, I think most CEOs and CFOs will really appreciate like a thoughtful approach to be like, I don't need $500,000 for us to start ABM. We might be at that point in a year, but right now I just need, $10,000 per person, really to get this program going. And then we'll see if it can scale, right? And so I also think the more you can build that in, it allows you to take, and you and your team to take more bets too, and not have like some big fear of failing because I didn't lose, $1 million on this thing. We tested it out and it didn't work. So let's move on to the next one really quickly. And you can just kind of forget, whereas if you do have those giant mistakes and big swings and you miss 2 in a row, that's probably not the best feeling in the world.
Right. Adam, now you've been on the job for 2 years and you built the team from 5 people to 22 people. What were some of the things that surprised you and what some of the lessons you learned and that you wish you did or didn't do when you first took the job in the first 3 or 6 months, or the rest of the audience who's taking on leadership roles?
Yeah. So I learned probably more of those lessons when I was at G2, to be honest with you, because that was the first time I really scaled a team to the size. The demand gen team at G2 went from, I think 3 people up to almost 20 people. And so we grew that team pretty aggressively. And so luckily for Help Scout, I probably learned more of those lessons, those hard lessons there. I think the biggest thing is really setting your team up for success, right? And giving them the space to be creative. No one wants to be told, here's what I want you to do. Here's the ABM playbook. And here's what, at the end of the day, I think marketers, it's a craft. And the thing that most people enjoy is figuring out the problem solving to say, what is going to work here, whether that be on the creative or the copy or whatever it might be. And so as a leader, you can't take that away from people by being here's what I think we should be doing. And here's exactly the playbook I want to be doing, right? It's more about aligning people to the goals. And then saying I don't care how we get there, come up with 5 ideas and I'll work with you on figuring it out, but let's figure it out together and get there. And so I think that was one of the things that was a big unlock, because then you have people feeling way more ownership of oh, I own this ABM strategy. I get to do whatever I want with it. That's exciting, right? And so from a career standpoint, they get to learn a ton of things. They enjoy the work that they're doing more, and you just get better results, right? But as a leader, it's more about keeping, I think, the teams and the individuals feeling there's what the work they're doing is still tied into the bigger goal, and making sure they have that understanding of the how it rolls up, which is one of the big keys, I think. So I think that's the biggest thing, because it's very easy to want to just jump in and be here's what I think we should be doing for this campaign. And even though you might not mean it to feel this, I'm telling you what to do, if you're the other person sitting there, it probably feels I'm telling you what to do, right? And so just understanding your role in all those conversations, because it's a weird switch to go from I'm just on the team giving ideas to now I'm a leader on the team and I'm giving ideas. That carries a different weight, because it's a lot of people just assume oh, he's telling me this is the campaign we should be running, this is what we're going to do, right? And so not doing that to people is a big thing.
Yeah.
So such a good point is having choice is helps people to have innate motivations in regardless how the choice look like and how it's structured, but simply having choice itself is a big motivator versus extrinsic motivation. That's really great. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the other thing too with that too is there's no shortage of jobs for people, especially growth marketers or marketers in general. So I also think it just keeps people happier, of what they want to do, and they get to learn and they get to try things. And the reality is 20 people on my team making decisions is better than just me making decisions, because, they're all better at what their own individual areas of expertise than I am. I just have a little bit of knowledge of all of it. And that's the only reason.
And I love just having a team in general and empowering people to be you are the expert in this thing, not me. And that is why you're on this team, right? So how do we collectively bring our brains together to be a greater power than just, myself in one seat? And so, and also just coming up through the ranks as being that generalist, Jill of all trades marketer who was a team of one every once in a while. It's so much nicer to have a team that you can empower to say, hey, here's our end goal. Here's how it marries to, the North Star goal for the company. do what you think is going to hit that part of it, right? And I will be here to support you if you're feeling like you're hitting blockers or what have you. But for me, I'm always like, I want to be surrounded by a team that feels smarter than me, right? Like, why would you want a team that you just have to tell what to do? So yeah, it empowers everyone at the table.
I'm literally the worst marketer at HelpScout. I say that not even joking. I'm the worst marketer we have because they are all so much better at their craft than I am. Like the writers, like our designers, obviously, our growth marketers, they're all better than me at what I do, right? And so, which is amazing to see. But yeah, I'm the worst marketer. That's what I tell them.
How do you structure your marketing team? What's the big buckets do you have?
So we have growth as one big bucket, and they're responsible for like free trials and leads in the mid-market for the sales team. We have product marketing. We have our brand team, which is design and dev. And then we have our content team. And marketing ops used to be on the marketing side. It's now rolled up under RevOps, which is in finance with sales ops as well. But those are the big buckets that we have.
Oh, so you have design and developers / engineers reporting into the brand team.
Yes. Yep.
Tell me more about that. Like there's different philosophies of like, oh, should they report into their respective like design team, product team, engineering team? How did you think about it?
Yeah, it's been a bit of an evolution since I joined. HelpScout's unique in terms of like two of our founders are designers. And so like the value on design at HelpScout is probably greater than most typical SaaS companies, right? And so like we do custom illustrations for all our blog posts. Like it's a really big part of what our brand identity is. And design previously sat under a wonderful leader that we had, and it was product design and brand design under like a full design team. She had since parted ways with the company and moved on to something else. And so we split it. So brand design moved into marketing, and then started sitting with the developers who we had doing the work. And then product design is in product now. And so we have the two separate teams, but they still work pretty closely together. And I think the big thing there is like any creative team, right? Making sure they have the space and it doesn't feel like an in-house like agency, like where we're just telling them what to do. Because I think, brand is such a big part of what we do and how we can really differentiate ourselves in the market, because a lot of companies, you look at like companies' websites to their positioning to the ads they're running, they all kind of look the same, right? And so I think one of the big areas that we see as an opportunity is like we can use brand as one of our big advantages in terms of standing out, which is just a big part of even just being successful. Is like just make yourself look different. You're probably, a lot of the ways there from what everyone else is doing. You'll just feel different. You look different. So I think that's a big piece of how the brand team kind of operates and making sure we give them the space to kind of have that creative ability.
Yeah.
How about development team?
Yeah, so they're on there as well. We have 3 developers actually. So we have our main HelpScout site. We have In the Works, which is our founder-focused like content site that we're running, and we have our blog. And so right now we added 2 because we just had 1 developer until the fall. So we just added 2 in the fall. We're going to figure out like lanes, because one of the things we're thinking through is like they're all doing a little bit of everything right now. It doesn't make more sense to have 1 developer just focused in on growth projects so they can just run and prioritize a little bit quicker, because what we're finding now is like the developers have to balance like, a request to, update something on the blog for the design team versus a request from, the growth team on a test they want to run. They're both important, right? But like they're in a weird spot where they're prioritizing across different teams and stuff like that. So probably going to define the swim lanes a little bit better for the development team.
Yeah, that's a key thing. And speaking of like swim lanes and growth, how do you guys think about like product growth versus marketing growth and who manages what? Yeah,
we work really closely with our product growth team. I guess technically it's really blurred, like the lines. So like because it's like the sign up flow is marketing. Once they get into the product, then like the onboarding is the product growth team, but then like the emails going to the user are from marketing. So it's kind of just working really closely with them and making sure, we're leaning really heavily into the data to understand like what are people doing once they get into the product, and what are the actions we want them to be doing, what drives the highest conversion. And we're just constantly looking at like our trial to paid numbers by channels and sources, and is there one key value prop that's driving a certain behavior, like if they're coming in off of a live chat functionality and the first thing they see in the product is a shared inbox, like are we seeing conversions deteriorate there? And so I think that the biggest thing there is just working really closely together and understanding what the other hand's doing, because like if the end outcome at the end of the day is customers, right? And so if we change something in the way we're positioning or what we're leading with, that could drop our trial to paid conversion percentages. And they might be thinking it's something in the product, when in reality it just could be marketing is now leading with the wrong message, or they could change something in an email. Or so there's lots of like, information there. And I think the big thing is like making sure we're just always looking at the same set of data points, because that's the big thing.
Yeah. So in terms of swim lanes, have you always had marketing ops roll up to rev ops?
No, it was under marketing before. And so Eli, who heads up our rev ops team, used to work on the marketing team. So, so I think it's awesome. I think it's, we hired someone in and we hired a sales ops person in, but I think there's good alignment. I think the big thing with a product-led company, it's nice to have like a third party almost, because we do have sales to consider. We have all this sort of like data, and I think one of the things is like you can skew data to look any which way you want. So it's nice to have like Switzerland over there to say like, hey, can you tell us what's actually happening here? Can you do an analysis of this? Because like we were just talking about this today, like product tours, like are they, we have an interactive product tour, and is that impacting the demo experience? And our sales leader is like, well, I feel like it is, I'm not sure why, but like feels like we're not getting as rich of conversations. And so like, and I'm not in the camp of like, well, I think it's great, like I would assume the quality would improve because they can interact with the product more. So, but again, it's like, let's let the data side and dig in there versus like sales ops coming with their data and my marketing ops team coming with my data. Like, so it's, I feel like it's, we're all on the same page a little bit more that way.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Holly, what else do you have? I feel like
this has been really great, Adam. Since we first connected, and we're both working a lot in growth, and now expanding our scope in a whole holistic way to drive marketing. So it's really good to reconnect and hear your new learnings in the past few years.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I still remember I've randomly Karina reached out to Holly when she was at Slack, and you guys you weren't a customer yet at GTO, but I was like, hey, I would just love to know exactly how the Slack growth engine works. Like, would you be up for chatting with me? And she was like, sure. And so I picked her brain for like an hour on the phone call. Then next time I was in the Bay Area, I was like, hey, can I take you out to lunch? So I can do it again. And she was like, okay. So I've been slow stalking Holly and her growth for a while. Yeah.
I learned so much from you, Adam. And yeah, it's so great to see your career grow, and I would love to keep in touch and continue to learn from you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I love this. And if I ever go to the Bay Area, Holly, I'm going to offer up some boba. We'll be chatting. Boba is the way to Holly's heart. Awesome. And Adam, where are you based out of?
I'm in Chicago.
Wow. And then in Chicago, We'll definitely have to go to lunch. So this will just be full circle.
Yes, just don't come in February. It's not that great out. Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. And we'll be on next week.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.